Hey there, we have a very special episode of the podcast today. Composer Bruce Broughton is here to talk about his work on many Disney theme park attractions, including Spaceship Earth, Ellen's Energy Adventure, The Making of Me, and a lot more. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks so much for joining me here on episode 33 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I'm your host, Dan Heaton. Today I'm looking back towards a time when Michael Eisner had taken over Disney and brought a slightly different sensibility to the attractions that were created under his reign. Starting up kind of in the mid to late 80s and early 90s, we had attractions that either connected directly to movie franchises, but also felt cinematic even when that wasn't the case. Disney has always had attractions that connected to their IP, but some of the attractions that came out of the 90s especially felt like they were big, like movies. The music felt big. Everything felt larger than life, and that's not a coincidence given who was in charge at the time. I mean, you look at an attraction like Ellen's Energy Adventure, which despite being a ride and looking at energy, also feels like a big movie story, or something like the Timekeeper, which takes you to different time periods, the past, the future, but also has that you're on a wild ride of a movie sensibility. Other attractions like The Making of Me, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, and Cinemagique in Paris all connected either directly or indirectly to that love of storytelling and movies, and that big, lighthearted feeling even when tackling mature subjects. I mention all these attractions because all of them had the same composer. Bruce Broughton did the score for each one of them, and others like It's Tough to Be a Bug and Soarin Around the World and Spaceship Earth. His songs were essential in making these attractions work. And his background from movies and doing so many scores for films like Silverado, Tombstone, The Rescuers Down Under, and a lot more connects to that approach that Eisner was taking with these attractions during the 80s and 90s. If you want to have an attraction feel like a big movie, you hire a composer that has worked on a lot of big movies. It makes sense. It was a real thrill to talk to Bruce about his experiences working with Disney at the theme parks and how do you put together a score for a theme park attraction. So I hope you enjoy it. It was a lot of fun to get to talk with him. And if you do like this podcast, it would be great if you listen on iTunes or another podcast service. If you could rate and review this podcast, it would help it a lot to keep expanding and allow me to get great guests like Bruce who have experience directly with Disney and its history. So let's get to it. Here is my conversation with Bruce Broughton. Okay, well, I am thrilled to be speaking with Bruce Broughton, whose extensive work as a composer includes the Oscar-nominated score for Silverado, many films, including The Rescuers Down Under and Young Sherlock Holmes, TV shows like Jag and Dallas, and the new show, The Orville, with Seth MacFarlane. He's also scored many Disney attractions, like the current version of Spaceship Earth, Ellen's Energy Adventure, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, and The Timekeeper, among others. Bruce, thanks so much for talking with me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Great. Okay, so that introduction, amazingly, only really scratches the surface of your work. So going back to the beginning, I know you studied composition in college. How did you really get interested in scoring specifically for like TV and movie projects?
Well, I think everybody who studies music, certainly every composer, when they're in the getting to the end of their undergraduate, they either ask or they get asked the question, "What are you going to do next year?" And that usually comes down to two answers. One, it's often, well, I think I'm going to go for my master's. Or it could be, well, I'm thinking about teaching. That seems to be pretty much what it is. I didn't really want to do either. So I decided that when I graduated, I was going to try to find work. And I thought as long as I have a composition degree, I should become a composer. Now, the urge to be a composer was not huge, but it was what my degree was. I had a musical background, and my family was musical, and so it was actually kind of a natural course that I became a composer. And I just started writing music when I was a kid anyway, so I obviously had an interest in it. And I decided that I really wanted to write music that would make people feel something. So it didn't take much sleuthing to figure out that movies was really the good way to do that. I thought that movies would provide me with the means to write the kind of music I wanted to write, which would be music of length, different styles of music. And I liked the idea that movies were seen by people in dark rooms, in groups, so I could get a lot of people at once. And definitely the music for a movie was of an emotional quality that would have some contact with people. I had always, as a composer, wanted to, and I still do, wanted to write music that was interesting to play for the musicians, that would engage the musicians and would always engage an audience as well. And even today, if I'm writing something that's not a film piece, I'm still interested in engaging people. So it really wasn't much of a leap to get to the idea of doing movies. I didn't grow up as a movie fan. When I was a kid, I don't think I was even aware that music was in movies. I just really went to see movies as something that was entertaining, which I'm thinking back on it was probably a good thing, because I realized that most people, when they go see a movie, they're not going there to hear the music. They're going to be entertained, So when I put music into a film or into an attraction, I'm there to help tell the story. And if somebody can listen to the music, that's great, but it's not the reason they got there. And fortunately, after all these years, the music does have a life. And even sitting here now chatting with you shows that there is a life, that people do actually pay attention to it. Some people do anyway. You do.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to have that happen.
Yeah, well, for me, some of the earliest memories that, I was amazed even going through your filmography of how the movies, for me as a kid in the 80s, like I remember The Boy Who Could Fly, which we watched on the Disney Channel, or some even TV like The Amazing Stories. And I know you've done a lot of projects that are kind of, I don't know if I did family films or family TV shows. What drew you to that? Was it you figured that your style of music really fit with those types of films or shows?
Those were just the shows I got asked to do. Basically, I just did a lot of family films because that was what I was asked to do. The first big film I did was Silverado. That got a lot of attention. And then Young Sherlock Holmes got a fair amount of attention. And then the one after that was Boy Who Could Fly. And after that, the films were whatever they were. But shortly after that was Harry and the Hendersons. And then not too long afterwards was Homeward Bound. Rescuers Down Under came around, I think, because it was an adventure film, and they wanted the guy who did Silverado, not knowing that actually when I was a kid I wanted to be an animator. So doing an animated movie for Disney was like a dream, So I was happy to do that. But at the same time as I did Rescuers, I was working on the Tiny Toon Adventures shows over at Warner Brothers, so which is a different kind of animation, completely different style. But again, that's for kids. And I don't know, around the time I just ended up doing a lot of family films. My style is primarily lyrical. It's sort of conducive to long melodies and themes. Though I've done adventure films, and I've done dark dramas and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I guess people didn't think of me for that. It would have been nice to have done a few more of them, but I wasn't unhappy doing the family things. I hear a lot more people come back after having grown up with my films than I think I probably otherwise would have. People who grew up with Homeward Bound or Rescuers Down Under or Boy Who Could Fly. Kids like to watch movies over and over and over and over again. So they really get a chance to hear the music and grow with it and have it be meaningful. If I were to play the tune for Homeward Bound, for a lot of people, they would just sort of melt, go, oh my gosh, I remember that movie. So you get that, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, and even a film like Silverado, which has that kind of rousing tune that, especially with Westerns, kind of had fallen off. That I think people look at it that way too, especially maybe people that were adults that love Westerns as a kid. So I think you connected in that way. But I know you mentioned about wanting to be an animator, which I think is interesting given how much you ended up doing with the theme parks. So how interested were you in Walt Disney as a kid? Wanting to be an animator, I assume he was someone you looked at. What was his influence on you?
When I was, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, I mean, I read every book I could find on Disney. I remember going to see Fantasia when I was about 12 or 13. It was being re-released then. And I remember seeing whatever animated film would come out, I would go see. I remember watching the Mickey Mouse Club when I was a boy. I would watch cartoons just to see how they moved and how they were done. I got to know the names of the animators, and I knew very well how animated movies were put together. So when I was about 12, I wrote a letter to Walt Disney and asked him for all of the cells for one of his cartoons, figuring that, once they shot it, they didn't need it anymore, and he'd probably just give it to me. And I sat around for, several weeks waiting for this box of stuff to show up, and not having any idea of how many thousands, tens of thousands of pictures there would have been had he actually done it. And what I got in the mail instead was a 2-page, maybe a 3-page mimeograph note on how animated movies were made. And I was very disappointed because I knew how animated movies were made. But, when Disneyland was open, which was 1955,
55, yeah.
I was there. It opened on a Sunday. I was there on Wednesday. And I remember my brother and I ran through the park. This also shows you this is a very different time. In 1955, I was 10 years old. My brother was 8 years old. And without our parents dropped us off at the park, at this new park, and said that they would pick us up at 4 or 5 in the evening. So these two little boys, completely unchaperoned, without any parents, running through the park, seeing all these great things, which had just been unleashed on mankind. And you'd never do that anymore. You'd never let little kids go off by themselves. And then I also remember in one of those early trips to Disneyland that in Tomorrowland they sold cells. They sold the drawings from the movies, the actual painted cells. And I remember I bought 2 of them. I bought one of Peter Pan, and I bought one of either Chip or Dale. I can't remember which one it is. I don't know where they are now. I wish I had them because it'd be worth a lot of money. They were just cutting them up and selling them to visitors.
That's interesting because the fact that you went to Disneyland so early, which I'm jealous of myself, not being able to do that. I've only been there a few times. I live in the middle of the country, but especially that early on. But yeah, it's funny because I have an 8-year-old and I couldn't imagine just driving her to even our local theme park and letting her run free. So I think you had it better probably based on that.
I don't think anybody in their right mind would do it now, but in those days it was very different. But it was too kid-likes for my parents. But for me, it was like Wonderland because Disney was really a hero. So years later, to be able to work in the movies and then actually get a chance to work on a Disney movie and an animated movie, it was really a big deal. I think the producer was really surprised that I was so keen on it because a lot of composers don't like working on animation. I ran into Jerry Goldsmith one time at in a parking lot, and so we're chatting. He says, "So what are you working on?" And I said, "Well, I'm working on this cartoon series over at Warner Brothers." And I said, "I'm supervising composer. I'm hiring the composers, and I'm sort of like the music department." And he looked at me and he frowned and he says, "Well, you're not writing them, are you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I am. Because I like that stuff." Anyway, that was kind of beneath him. But although he did some animation too, not very well, but he did some animation.
Well, that's a funny story because I think it's changed a little bit given how where animation is now. But yeah, even when The Rescuers Down Under came out, it was a different situation. So based on that, I'm sure that probably had an impact in you getting to work actually scoring for theme park attractions, which I want to make sure I ask you about. So many of those you've done. So how did you first get involved? I believe The Making of Me was your first project, but how did that get started for you back in the late 80s?
I'm not really sure. It was shortly after I did The Boy Who Could Fly. And Jeff Katzenberg, who was over at Disney at that time, liked the movie The Boy Who Could Fly. I heard this from other people, and I think he told me one time something about it. And so when I first saw so I got called for the making of me, and the temp track was basically The Boy Who Could Fly. The temp track, is that music that they put into movies before it gets recorded.
Right.
They put music in there to give them an idea of how it's going to be played and the style and all that kind of stuff. And the director said to me, that Jeff really likes that score. He really likes The Boy Who Could Fly. I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm just telling you, he really likes it. So I looked at him. I said, you mean don't change it very much? And he said, yeah. So if you listen to The Making of Me, which is a really cute film,
Yeah.
Particularly given the subject, which is how birth happens. There's if you were to compare it to The Boy Who Could Fly, stylistically there are a lot of very similarities. It's not a copy, but the styles are very similar. But the one thing that stood out for me on that one was that it had the first piece of animation that I ever did. It had a 1-minute bit, and so I had to do an animated bit. I mean, and I'd never done animation before. That was my very first thinking. I would never do animation again. I had this 1-minute bit to do in the theme park thing, and that became my premier outing as an animation composer. So anyway, that movie came, and nothing happened again at the theme parks. I mean, it was sort of a one-off. And then several years later, I guess maybe 5 or 6 years later, Jerry Goldsmith was supposed to do Time After Time, which was called
Right, the Timekeeper. Yes.
It's the Timekeeper, but it was done for France. It wasn't done for here, France. And Jerry was supposed to do it, and Jerry got busy and he fell out of it. So I got called on it, and I followed Jerry on a couple of things, and he was always very good to me. I mean, I admired the guy enormously. He was my musical Walt Disney because I thought Jerry was just incredible. Still do. And however it happened, anyway, I followed Jerry on this thing. And I had seen shows like this, the Circle Vision shows, but of course the thought of doing one never really occurred to me. And man, I had a great time. I just thought it was great. And the thing that made it even better was that the guys who were producing it, I continued to work with over the years. I mean, I've worked with these teams, particularly the one producer, Tom Fitzgerald. Tom and I have worked together for years and years and years. The last thing we did was Soarin Over the World, which also was a Jerry Goldsmith thing. The original one was Jerry Goldsmith. So Tom and I became good friends and worked on these things many times. And I found the whole experience incredible. I've often said this, that theme parks, to me, theme park writing and animation are the two best jobs you can get in movies because everybody knows what they're doing and the picture is pretty much stable and there's no funny business. There's nobody going off on big artistic, ideas about they're going to make changes of this, they're going to change this, and let's put the scene there, let's put the scene. They don't do that at all. They know exactly what they're doing. In the Disney case, they know how many people are going in the room. They know how long it takes to get the people from outside into the inside and from the inside to the outside. They know when the show starts, they know when the show ends, they know what the pre-show is going to be. I mean, all this stuff is figured out. They know that if they have, like in Spaceship Earth, if they have some challenges of boarding people, let's say if you have handicapped people and you have to stop the trolley from going, they know how to handle that. They have emergency systems, all this other kind of stuff. And actually it does affect the music because you find you have to play music and it takes a lot of this stuff into consideration. So I find them really interesting jobs to do, as well as the fact that I've never worked on two theme park shows that were the same. I mean, you never know. When you're getting a theme park show, you never know whether you're getting a movie or whether you're getting a ride, whether it's a live cartoon or whether you're pretending to be part of the audience or whether the audience is supposed to be listening to you as a live band or, whatever it is. You don't know what the conceit is. All you're doing is you're providing music that maybe millions of people are going to come look at and enjoy. You get to solve all these technical problems and be creative and have really a tremendous team, really a great team behind you of people who you stick around with for years. make the good friends. It's a great association. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And you referenced about 5 attractions there that I want to ask you about. so that was a lot to cover. But I want to start with the Timekeeper, or with Time After Time, because that's an interesting case where I have been to Paris, but the one I saw was the one in the United States with Robin Williams and everything. But that's a case where you actually, I believe, did 2 different soundtracks, right, based on the U.S. versus Paris. Can you talk a bit about how that went, and how do you do that, putting that together?
Actually, I thought it was kind of silly. I mean, I thought that having to do it was kind of silly, although I didn't mind. The idea was that the Timekeeper was going to show up in France. So it played in France for a long time. And it's still, even though it hasn't been in the park for a few years, it's still a really popular memory in a lot of Europeans. I get letters occasionally from people who say, oh, where can I find the theme to the Timekeeper? I just love that, and blah, 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 which was really great because it was a really cool show. When they put it into Florida, they changed it slightly. And I do mean slightly. They put a few phrases in English. They put a couple of extra scenes in. But it was, for all intents and purposes, basically the same show that they put into France. But the feeling was that because now this is going to go into America, they needed to have an American score, not a French score. Well, I'm an American guy. I wrote them both. So I wrote the French score and I wrote the American score. What they also did in America, in which case I guess this does make sense, when they put the Robin Williams intro with the robot, that put a completely different energy, at least into the pre-show. It didn't really affect the show itself. I think the pre-show was very, very, very different than what it was in France. So anyway, for whatever it was, I ended up having the same show, but with 2 different scores running at the same time, which I think was, as far as I know, is kind of a first. I don't know any other circumstance where anybody would have 2 scores going to the same show. And I was happy to have it. It's I've always liked the show, and I thought it was a lot of fun. They have different themes, different musical themes for both of them. I tried to rethink the American version so that I could deliver as much as was asked of me. It's funny, the French version was recorded in London. The American version was recorded in Hollywood. So I guess even there we were staying close to home.
Well, it's really interesting that they would go to that much effort in that case, because most people are not going to notice a huge, I mean, not that you didn't do a difference, but on the side of the guests, I mean, people aren't watching them side by side. So it's a lot of different guests.
Well, one thing, in the French version, we had an obligation, a contractual obligation to include French music. On the building of the Eiffel Tower, we'd use the something of Offenbach. The tune goes da 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 da. I think it's like a can or something. We did that, and then there's a band playing in the distance. They're playing a piece by a French composer. Every once in a while, we'd use French music. I think that was changed. That may have been changed in the American version. It's been a few years since I've looked at it. But there were a few changes, between one and the other. But they did have the contractual obligation to include some music of France, so that the show that was showing in France actually had something to do with France, aside from being the Eiffel Tower. A side part of that was a few years ago, I was in Vienna, and I was visiting some friends there, and I went to, I think it was Schönbrunn Castle. I was someplace, it was in a park, and there was this large building, this kind of glass building, and my friend looked at me and says, this is where they shot the scene for Time After Time with Jules Verne. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my Lord, yeah, there it is. This place that was supposed to be France was actually in Vienna. And it was really kind of fun because now I'm seeing it in a contemporary, I mean, it's an old building, it's a very old building, but it was all dressed up to look like France. I mean, it's a movie. You never know where you really are and what you're really looking at, but it was really kind of fun to revisit it that way.
Yeah, that's funny. And I wanted to ask you about one other, because I went to Paris it was 10 years ago or so, to Disneyland Paris. And one of our favorite things we saw there was Cinemagique, which is still playing, I believe, with Martin Short and Julie Delpy. And it's one of the, as far as like a love letter to movies, it's one of my favorite attractions that they've ever done. I mean, it still holds up so well. I checked it out again today. Do you think, how did you get involved with that? And do you think your movie background, I assume, probably helped out with that?
I don't know. As I said earlier, I mean, I was used to working with the team. I think I got selected sometimes for the big shows that really told a big story. And this one was definitely that. I mean, Cinemagique is a really terrific film. My wife and I saw it, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and which was a few years after I'd done it. And I was really impressed. I mean, there was a big audience for it because it runs, every 20, 25 minutes. There was a good-sized audience for it. It was an appreciative audience. But man, it really plays well. I mean, it's a really good movie. It had some kind of cool things in it that I would probably have to point out as it was playing to show you what it was. I mean, they used clips from old movies. Like there was a clip from Pinocchio, of Pinocchio Under the Sea, where we used the original music from the film, and then I had to marry it into my score. There was another scene where, in Casablanca, where the Max Steiner score is playing in back. I think as time goes by or something is playing, the theme goes back, and it's married to the picture. So what my score had to do was, my score had to meet the movie, play that scene with the music that was in it, and then continue on into Cinemagique. I mean, there are a whole bunch of little things like that you would never pay attention to unless you were really, really looking at it carefully. It's a terrifically well-made film. And the conceit of having Martin Short in the audience and then suddenly get sucked into the film works really well too. That's what I say. When you take on one of these jobs, you just never know what it's going to be. And it's really. I mean, I sometimes say to these guys, "Okay, I have no idea what the show is about. I have no idea how to solve this, but I'll be seeing you, and I'll figure it out." So I go home and I figure it out. They're always fun to do.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be a really fun project to work on, because I had forgotten how good it was, and having watched it again very recently, I mean, it was on a YouTube video, but still, you still get, for it to work that well on a YouTube video shows how powerful it is.
It's a really good, really strong movie. I hope it'll sit there for years. I mean, after all, they built a theater for it.
Yeah, me too. And it's too bad that, I mean, I know that it does have some French elements, but it's too bad that isn't something similar or something they could do in some of the other studios parks, like in the U.S. and such. But it does seem very, very good for France. So it's very European in a way.
Well, Tokyo speaks French.
Yeah, so they'd have to make a lot of adjustments. You mentioned Spaceship Earth, and that redoing, because you've done a lot of film projects, whether it's Circle Vision or 4D or things like that, but this is a ride which basically takes you through the history of, it started out communications, more innovation, as you know, but doing that score, I know you even mentioned about how they have to stop the project sometimes and such. How do you mix so many different historical times into a score that kind of flows well on an attraction like that?
Well, that's one of the advantages of working in the movies. When you're working in movies, you're always working in different styles. For instance, we were talking about Silverado and The Boy Who Could Fly. If you took those two movies and put them side by side, the music's very, very different. If you took the music from Silverado and Tombstone, two Westerns that I did, the music in those two shows are completely different, but they're both Westerns. So you rely a lot upon the style of the picture. Sometimes you rely upon some research, like particularly in Spaceship Earth, where I had to research some of the music of the time. Like, I'm not exactly up on everything they were doing during the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, or where the differences between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and then the classical era, and then, you get into the modern era. Some of the stuff you just kind of guessed, like the music for Rome and for Phoenicia. I mean, you just kind of take a stab at it and say, well, this sounds sort of Roman, this sounds sort of Phoenician. One of the things that was interesting on that show, and I guess the reason I really talked about it was because I had been on the original ride years before. And the thing that I found out was that the tram stopped. It often stopped. And I, in my naivety, thought that it was a breakdown, that the tram just every once in a while stopped. I didn't realize it was actually, there was a reason for it happening. So when we got to do the updated version of Spaceship Earth, I mentioned that. I said, the thing I noticed was that the tram often stops. And they say, well, that's intentional because, when you're loading people, you want to make sure for safety considerations that everybody can get on safely. And sometimes it's better just to stop the tram until everybody is on securely rather than rush them on and have a light dragging or something like that as they're going up the climb. He said, however, that does pose a problem for you in that, he said, we don't know how you're going to solve this. He said, we have 3 or 4 rooms. The way Spaceship Earth works, as I know you know and a lot of your listeners know, is that you go basically from room to room, you go from time zone to time zone. And at the beginning of it, you start in I think, the Stone Age, and then you go to, I'm not sure which is which, but Phoenicia, Rome, and Egypt or something like that. And they're basically little rooms of activity that follow each other. And each era, each room, each society, each time zone has its own music, and they're right next to each other. So they said occasionally when you're up there, the tram might stop and you'll be stuck between 2 rooms, hearing 2 different musics at the same time. So we don't know how you're going to work on that. We don't know how you're going to fix that. And I thought, well, that's pretty easy. I know how to do that. Because it's the same problem that you have with that somebody else had already figured out for me. The same problem you have on It's a Small World. I think people don't realize on Small World, they're taking this little boat around hearing that same tune over and over and over and over again. And every time they float by a certain doll singing a language, the tune stays in sync with all the other ones. But there's the French are singing next to the Germans are singing next to the Dutch are singing next to the Russians, and so on, all the way through this whole thing. And the whole thing is in sync. So I did it basically the same way. I wrote, I think, sometimes 4 pieces that could all be played on top of each other, using basically the same chord structure, the same tempo, changing the music entirely. But after I had figured it out, I put it all on a computer and stack them so I could have like 4 pieces actually play at the same time and listen to them. And if anything stood out, I would change it. But that way I kind of ensured that if anybody got stuck between 2 different time zones and they were hearing 2 different kinds of music, they wouldn't be able to tell that. They wouldn't be, they really probably wouldn't be able to even tell what was happening. So it was kind of fun,
Yeah, now I want to ride the attraction and get stuck so I can test out and hear this because, I totally get what you mean because you do often stop, but there are certain rooms that are rather large, especially like the ones you mentioned as you get into the Renaissance and then into the printing press, and could be some interesting combinations there. So I want to ask you on a similar note, this update that you worked on the score for, they did do a lot of different scenes, not all of them, but some.
Oh, yeah.
So when it's closed, when you're doing the score, it's different than a movie where you're watching the movie. Do you get to ride through like while they're building these or after they're built to kind of, how much do you get to actually experience the ride to help with doing the score?
No, you do ride it. You pretty much have to ride it. The music comes in pretty much at the end, because particularly on things like this, there are 2 shows that come to mind like this. There was Spaceship Earth and Ellen's Energy Adventure. They both were rides. And you really have to ride it. You have to experience the ride, and you have to experience the film or the shows, however they're being projected or however they're being shown. You have to go through the dinosaur bit. You have to... you have to see the Renaissance go to the medieval, whatever it is, all this stuff. So you get a sense of how it all plays, because there are some problems to solve that you can only solve by actually being there. There was one problem that to be honest, when I was on Spaceship Earth, that I didn't pay any attention to and didn't notice it until I rode on the final ride. There's one thing that I didn't take any consideration of, and that was the actual sound of the tram. Because the sound of the tram sometimes chews up the music. If the music is kind of soft and in a certain range, the tram will kind of eat it up. Right. So I thought, okay, if I should ever do this again, I'm going to pay attention to the tram, and be a little bit more careful. But overall, I'm very happy with the way the thing works. Particularly on Spaceship Earth, I'm kind of amused by knowing where all the music is placed. Like, there's one spot where you go by the medieval university and you hear a male soprano singing something in Latin. Oh, no, there's a story too. Singing something in Latin, and then you go on to this little group playing Renaissance music, and over on the right, there's somebody playing with a violin and a lute. So there's music over there on the right, there's music over on the left, there's music that you've just passed. The Latin thing was kind of funny because it was supposed to be music for a medieval university. Well, medieval universities, Latin was a big subject. So I decided I would do the piece in Latin, and I decided to use just a solo voice accompanied by an organ or something simple. So they didn't have any. I mean, I mentioned it to them. I said, "This is what I'm going to do." And they went, "Okay, that sounds right." So now I had to go find a Latin text. It was kind of hard to find a text. I mean, I didn't know really what to, where even to search. So I found a poem. I think it was a love poem. I mean, it wasn't anything disgusting. I mean, it was just something like, I think you're cute, and however they say that in Latin. So I showed them the Latin text, and they looked and they went, "No, I don't think so. I think you'd be safer just doing something like Hallelujah or something very directly, churchy." And I said, "Well, why is that?" He said, "Well, because we have a lot of people go by this, a lot of people are going to be taking this ride, and there are going to be a few Latin scholars in there, and somebody will write us a letter for sure." They figure out the guy's singing and it's not anything proper. We're going to get letters. We'd rather not get the letters. So I think that thing just has somebody singing Alleluia or something pretty generic. It's kind of funny. But it also shows that for basically the overall point of the theme parks is that millions of people go see these things over and over. I have several friends who, when they get a 2-week vacation here in Los Angeles, when they get a 2-week vacation, they fly to Florida and they spend their 2 weeks at the Disney parks. I mean, or I have friends who, if they get a weekend, they'll drive out to Disneyland and spend the night at the hotel or 2 nights at the hotel, and they go to both of the parks and enjoy the hotel. I mean, there are a lot of people who just do the Disney experience over and over and over and over and over again. So I do believe them. They get lots of letters about this piece or that piece or, this thing that they did in the show or that thing they did in the show and all that kind of stuff. So they're very, very, very careful to get it as perfect as they possibly can the first time. And I think they do a really great job. The other thing is, for every time I've been to Disneyland or to any of the parks, it always looks like it was just installed. I mean, it never has any sense that it's been there for 10 years or 15 years or something like that. It's it's quite a place.
It's impressive. Yeah, I know a lot of people. I mean, I go pretty often, but I know people that travel from all over the country that have annual passes that go 3, 4, 5 more times a year. And with the internet now, if there's something off, like Spaceship Earth, if there's like anything missing, people will just jump on it. So I can imagine people at Disney having headaches about, well, the TV's not working or something, and everybody calls it out. So, but it doesn't happen that often. So it's impressive. I wanted to ask you about Ellen's Energy Adventure because it closed recently. I mean, it was open for something about energy to be open for 20 plus years is pretty amazing. But one thing that's really different about that one is, that's a 45-minute attraction. So you're almost getting to the point where you're scoring not a feature film, but something closer to that level. So what was that one like with working on a retool, but also on something that long? It's not a 10-minute or 15-minute attraction at all.
I don't know. That was really one of my favorite shows. We had, I don't know. I always enjoy that show. Every time I go to Epcot, I'd go look at that show. The show just played really well. And of course it was huge, because the screen was huge and the room was huge. The people movers held 600 people. It was timed to hold 600 people, meaning that the doors were open long enough to get 600 people in and comfortably seated before they started to drop the lights and things like that. So in that time, there's like a 4 or 5 minute overture that plays when people go into the room. And I think also when people leave it, there's another piece. I fashioned the overture actually, I didn't fashion it, I just used it. I took the overture and I changed the title. I call it an Epcot overture, and we use it as a concert piece. You can get it through, if you have an orchestra, Disney rents it as a symphonic piece, and it's been used, now and again for something like that, because it's really just a piece of music. It doesn't accompany anything other than it promotes the beginning of the show. I don't know. It was exciting, and also one of the things I liked about it was that because it was about energy, it was very powerful. I mean, visually it was very powerful, but the music really had a big punch to it, and that was a fun show. I liked that one a lot.
It's really interesting. That one is just that theme that you've done. It's not a surprise to me to hear that, you've been able to use it, in kind of a different way. Because that's one of those songs that you can hear walking around Epcot that could almost be anywhere in Epcot. It's not so locked into the energy adventure attraction itself. It's one of those catchy tunes that really holds up well. And that reminds me, I wanted to ask you too about your music in general, because some of your songs are on the official album of Walt Disney World, and you've, obviously have been released over the years, your theme park songs. But I know I've heard you mention that possibly putting together some sort of release with a lot more of your music. And some of my listeners asked me about this coming in that I should ask you. So how is that coming along? Should we be excited about some sort of release of more of your theme park music?
I wish I could tell you how it's coming along. All I can tell you is that the album is finished, that we've mastered. I think it's all the pieces that I ever did in the theme parks. The things that from years ago, like Mickey's Audition and short pieces, long pieces, and it's just waiting for Disney to release it. I think they're trying to figure out how they'd like to let it out. So as far as I understand, it's still in the works. But as far as my job on it, it's been done. As far as the record company, we've completed our end. We're just waiting now for the thing to be released.
Well, hopefully that works out, because I know there's people that would really enjoy hearing the larger breadth of pieces beyond the few themes. And I did want to ask you about one more piece of music you did recently, which you referenced earlier, which is Soarin Around the World.
Right.
Specifically, I know you mentioned Jerry Goldsmith, and him obviously doing the iconic theme from Soarin Over California. So what was it like to come in, because now it's around the world, and you're using some of his, not using his theme, but working from it, but developing something new. How was that process like, kind of working from such a beloved theme and ride?
Well, I actually did use his theme. I did a lot of arrangements of it. I wrote, there's a fair amount of original music in it as well. As much as I could use what he did, I did, because we did a lot of talking about this, is that people are prepared to go hear it. They didn't want to change it a lot, and it wasn't something that people would come in and say, okay, we got a new show, let's hear completely new music. There's a lot of emotional attachment to the original one. So I tried to be as close to the original as I could, where it was appropriate. There's some things that really are not appropriate. And for those things, like when you fly over the Taj Mahal, that music doesn't have much to do with the California show, and a few other things are like that as well. Yeah, actually, it was a nice project for me for a bunch of reasons. One, because it's a spectacular show. I would say, however anybody felt about a Disney theme park, if they were only going to see one show, that would be the show to go see. It's a very grown-up show. It's an exciting show. It's not, kids can enjoy it, but it's really a show that adults can really get involved in. It's a beautiful show. What you're looking at is completely stunning, scene after scene after scene after scene. And it's exhilarating. You feel like you're up there flying because you can't see the edges of the screen. You feel like you're actually looking at what you're looking at. So the music, one of the nice things about the music is there's no dialogue. There are a few sound effects, but nothing that really gets in the way of music. For the composer, it's just great because you sit there with this monster screen and the music is coming at you. Alan was like that too. You walk into this huge room and wham, there's the music. And the same thing with Soarin'. The music just really hits you. And I'd heard for years how much people, loved Jerry's score to that. So, the thought of even changing it was kind of dumb. I wouldn't have done it. So it's a combination of, it's definitely Jerry, but there's definitely bits of me in it. And I think between the two shows, the Soarin Over California was a really good show. I think this is a better show because it's bigger, the vistas are wider, there's more to see. I know that they plan to bring back the California show from time to time. And I would go see the California show again anytime. But of the two of them, this is the one that I think is really the killer.
Yeah, that'd be tough for me because I love the California one so much. I would love to have it where they showed, like you mentioned, they showed both, because the Around the World has especially the great opening with the mountains and everything. That's super powerful. but then there's scenes I love from the original, so it's a tricky one. And you mentioned recording with a big dome screen like that. You've done a few, like you've done a variety of you've done 4D with It's Tough to Be a Bug and Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, and then O Canada with the 360. In cases like the Circle Vision films, for instance, how do you score for something when you have like that type of 9 screens surrounding you? Or does that present new challenges when you have all these different types of media like Circle Vision?
Yeah, it does. The way I see it literally is, we do all this stuff on computers now. So when I get the picture, it's a picture that I put on my computer screen, and I get the 9 screens in front of me. I can't see it as a circle, but I've got all the information that is going to be on the 9 screens in front of me in pieces. And so I can see what's going on here and there and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I'm aware that nobody in the theater is looking at everything and seeing everything all at once. So you have to treat it a little bit differently than you would treat a normal film where you can draw somebody's attention to a piece of action. You basically play the entire scene, and then you hope that people will come back and see it enough times that they will get more information visually, and that the music, will help out and do that. But you can't point the music and say, "Oh, look at this! Isn't that funny?" Or do a little slapstick bit or a little bit of Mickey Mousing. It just doesn't work in those 9 screen shows. They're fun to do because they are, really comprehensive. They're encompassing. They take you all in, and you pretty much forget that you're just walking. You're in the middle of a movie, literally. They're a challenge. Again, though, those are things you have to look at before you can do them.
Right, and it keeps it interesting, like you mentioned, where each project kind of has their own hurdles there. And I wanted to ask you about your new project, which the Orville, which I know it's not related to theme parks, but I know it's something that's currently on TV, so I thought people might be interested. With Seth MacFarlane, of course, and I had not caught up with it, but I did watch the pilot last night and thought it was a lot of fun. And I was just wondering how you connected with Seth and got involved with doing the theme for that show.
Well, I ended up doing the main theme, and I did the pilot. So you've seen what I've done on it. I met Seth over the phone. He called me out of the blue about 2 or 3 years ago, and introduced himself. I knew who he was, but I'd never met him. And asked me if I would consider doing an arrangement for him. He had a concert coming up at the Hollywood Bowl in the summer with John Williams and the LA Philharmonic, and he wanted to sing a song called "Luck Be a Lady Tonight," from the Broadway show. And the arrangement that they had, John thought was a little too hip for the band, So he said, would you do an arrangement for me? And I said, yeah, sure. But in the back of my mind thinking, I've never done anything like this before in my life. One of the things about my background is I really am classically trained. I used to be a pretty good pianist. And if you sat down some music in front of me, I could probably play it. I was a really good sight reader, like I said. But if you asked me to play show tunes, I could play the tunes and I could play the chords, but I had absolutely no pizzazz. You would not want to hear me play in a rhythm section. I really was awful at it. And for some reason, I completely missed what a lot of composers do, mostly when they're young. I missed doing any jazz band, any stage band, any big arrangement. I just never did it. So this is like my premiere, right, with the LA Philharmonic at the Hollywood Bowl and John Williams. So we did that, and it turned out well. Seth is amazing. Seth learns it really fast. He's a really good musician. He's got great ears. He's got really good taste. He's a great guy to work with. So then he called again, I don't know, maybe a year later, and he said, I do these albums. I record these albums, and I'm going to record a few more. I have 3 albums to record. Would you do one of them with me? And so I said, yeah, again thinking, I've never done that. This is creepy, but yeah, of course I'll do it. So we did that. He recorded his 3 albums. We went to London, and he recorded with 3 different arrangers. One of them has just come out. Ours is yet to be mixed. One was a swing album. That's the one that's come out. The one that we did had songs from the movies or from Broadway. Some songs would be familiar. Some songs would not be familiar. And the third one, I think, are ballads. And so in 1 week, he recorded 45 songs. That's
wow.
incredible. But he doesn't have a lot of time, he doesn't waste time. So when I say he recorded 45 songs, what I mean was he literally recorded 45 songs, but he came in completely prepared with the lyrics and with the routine. I mean, he knew the whole thing that he wanted to have done and does it. And then he called me up and said, would you consider doing a TV show? And I said, well, like what? So he told me about the Orville. And the hook on it was, aside from working with him on a show like this, the hook was, you don't have to do any mock-ups. All you do is just go at home, write your music, come in and record it with an orchestra, and that's it. And I said, yeah, great, that's it. He said, just like you used to do it. And I said, yeah, great, that's the way I want to do it. That means I didn't have to put anything into a synthesizer. I didn't have to do what they call a mock-up, which is a synthesized version of the score that is going to be recorded, which never sounds quite the same. I didn't have to do any of that kind of stuff. I just wrote the music and, like he said, went in and used a 75-piece orchestra to record the thing. And on the show now, they're still using the big orchestras. They're using like 74, 75 people week in and week out. That's not only unusual, it's unheard of, because he likes the big orchestra. Even if you see his other shows like Family Guy and all that, they're done with big orchestras. And he gets composers who are really good. I mean, all the guys he works with are really good. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of a movie music geek in that, and I'm saying that kindly because he can call up scores and episodes on his phone. I mean, I've watched him do it. He'll be talking about something and say, well, it's like this, and then he spends a minute going through his phone, and then pretty soon you're listening to episode something of something, and the score, I say, hear that, or he'll just play up the track. So I mean, he's on it all the time. He's really unusual, but he's a great guy to work with.
Yeah, I think I underestimate how musically talented he is. I mean, recently my daughters listened to the soundtrack to Sing, where he's doing Frank Sinatra.
Yeah,
and it's incredible, and it's. I know he was recently nominated for a Grammy for one of his albums. So I think that's, I doubt that I realized just how talented he is. So that's really interesting to hear.
I was watching when I don't know why I was watching, but I was on YouTube and a sidebar came up. You know how they show you all the videos that they think you're going to be interested in.
Yeah.
And it said, Family Guy, Shapoopy. And I thought, what? Shapoopy is a song from the Music Man. It's a song that Buddy Hackett sings. It's a silly song. So I clicked on this thing, and here's Peter, the main character, singing in a football stadium, a 5-6 minute rendition or maybe longer of the song from the Music Man, Shapoopy, in his voice. Well, the voice, of course, is Seth. and the band's playing, and they got a choir going, the whole thing. And I found out afterwards, he told me that the arrangements they actually got from the Music Man. They bought the arrangements from the Music Man, and they re-recorded them, and they did them on this half-hour TV show. Well, who would do that, I mean, and then I found him on another YouTube singing another thing from the Music Man, Trouble in River City, at a concert in London with the John Wilson Orchestra. And he stands up there and he does the whole shtick. I mean, the guy is not to be under thought. He's pretty talented, pretty amazing.
Well, that's exciting. I need to look into a lot more of that, because I feel like I barely scratched the surface of what he can do. Okay, well, I know I could probably ask you about dig into every attraction much more, but I'll save that for another time, I guess. But I did want to ask you one more thing, just about theme parks in general. So, do you have interest in doing another attraction? Is that something that you still would like to do, or is it more if they ask you, sure you'd love to do it?
Yeah, if they ask me, sure, I'd love to do it. I'm not sitting around looking for things to do, but I do like the theme park things. As I say, I always thought the theme park and animation were terrific jobs. I like the theme park because I like the shows themselves. They're always really interesting. They're always creatively challenging. And it's just a great group of people working on them. I did one non-Disney theme park thing about a year or so ago for what they call Ferrari Land over by Barcelona, Spain. It's very similar to the Soarin project. And again, I mean, they were a lot of the people who worked on that were former Disney people. One of the guys had actually worked on Soarin. And you find that they've spent so many months and in cases years working on these shows that they really do take you in. They embrace you in as part of the family. So Yeah, I mean, why would I turn that down? That's great. And then have, 30 million people come and listen to your music. That's not a bad thing.
No, I can't imagine that that's a terrible thing, especially at a place like Disney World. And I'm going to have to look into, I'm familiar with Ferrari Land, but obviously I wasn't familiar with that attraction. So I'm going to have to look into that too. That sounds exciting. I don't think I'll be making the short jaunt over there anytime soon, but I'll be looking for more on that. Well, Bruce, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really fun, and I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on it.
It was really great to talk to Bruce about his career. If you'd like to learn more about what he's doing, you can go to brucebroughton.com. If you'd like to learn more about what I'm doing, you can go to tomorrowsociety.com, where you can sign up for an email list on the right column of the main page, which will notify you about any new blogs or podcasts immediately when they're being published. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, you can go to TomorrowSOC, or on Facebook or Instagram at Tomorrow Society. And if you want to contact me, you can email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. The music for this podcast is composed by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back talking to you again very soon.